Welcome to today's show. Today we are talking about validating success as a strength and conditioning coach using AI and data for sports medicine. I'm your host today, Brian Buck, and today we have Tracy Zimmer from the University of Pennsylvania, where she's been a coach there since 2010, where she's been designing and implementing strength and conditioning programs for athletic teams, where she also handles all the administrative details for the department, including overseeing Sparta Science Technology. So Tracy, thanks for joining me today. And
Thanks for having me.
yeah, of course. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and you're obviously at Penn now, but where were you before Penn and how did you get going in the field?
So I've actually only ever been at Penn. I started out at Temple, played lacrosse, and I was required to do an internship, which I couldn't complete in season. So I came over here to Penn in the summer, finished my internship, and they had a position open up that was part-time. So we transitioned from a 4,500 square foot weight room to one that's close to 20,000 square feet. So I worked my way in from an intern to part-time to full-time, which rarely ever happens.
Right. That is rare. Now, what you haven't said yet is that while at Temple, you're on the lacrosse team, right?
Yep.
Two-time captain, all Atlantic 10. You haven't said any of that yet, but you can go ahead and fill us in. So what's your athletic background and what did you do there at Temple?
Yeah, I played lacrosse, as you already mentioned, two-time captain. I also had the opportunity to play overseas in Prague in the Prague Cup in 2008. Had some awards. I don't really get too excited about them. It's a team sport. After college, I competed in powerlifting. I've done bodybuilding and physique, and I've also fought Muay Thai.
Awesome. Well, I think that's such a huge part of being a coach, right? We can always preach things, we can say things, but I think it definitely helps to have some credibility, especially with your background in sports and understanding what it takes to strap it on every day, go in there when you're sore, you're hurt, you're beat up, go out there and compete. And then on top of that, you're talking about setting records in powerlifting, and I'm pretty sure you hold the Pennsylvania state squat record.
I do.
These aren't little details. I mean, these are obviously you're not going to tell them unless I ask you, but like these are a big deal. And so when it comes to, talking to athletes and talking about programming and health and longevity, I mean, these definitely, they go a long way.
Yeah, I think that helps too because, the athletes respect what you're doing, either whether it was your, college career or post-collegiately or, I'm never going to ask an athlete to do something that I haven't done myself. So I think that buys you a lot of respect as a coach.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I know that you guys have been, working alongside Sparta Science since 2015, and it's something I can relate to as well, where being in a program and going about doing your program a certain way, and then you bring technology in, and that's not always an easy transition. And, what can you speak on as to that, as far as, maybe being uncomfortable initially with bringing something in, maybe something that's new, especially talking here about force plates, but really any technology, bringing it in isn't always an easy transition. So what can you tell me about that and how it kind of went at Penn?
Yeah, I mean, with everything new, there's a huge learning curve. For us, the challenge is that we've got 33 varsity sports, and 4 full-time strength coaches for those teams. So we all have a lot of responsibility. And I think that just getting the initial software up and running was part of it for us to be able to learn how Sparta worked, what it measures, how we can teach it to our athletes and coaches and get them to believe in what we want to be done with it. In terms of individual sports using it, I think we're still having some challenges with getting all teams to buy in. But the teams who have bought in, we're seeing a lot of success with. And I think that it's a large part of trusting us to be able to implement the technology and, take some actionable items away from it that the sport coaches are now understanding better the longer that we've used it.
Yeah, I think the big word there is trust, right? So these athletes today, especially ones that you're working with, they're extremely cerebral. You're talking an Ivy League environment. There's so much exposure to technology out there and through social media and through all these other mediums of kids today know they see a lot and you're not gonna throw it over their head and throw something by them. They're probably gonna look it up themselves, or they already know about it. So it's hard to BS your way through a lot of this stuff. So you're talking about 4 coaches and about 1,000 student athletes. In an Ivy League environment where you have cerebral student athletes. So technology and the implementation of it is supposed to make life easier, but it's not always that way with new technology. Sometimes it adds a few steps. So initially, was it something that was harder, and how has it transitioned to, making your life easier with technology? Is that something that's going on there at Penn?
Yeah, so initially, to be completely honest, it was challenging to get it up and running because we, as coaches, were sort of trying to understand, okay, how is this software going to help us from a programming standpoint? And then we've sort of, adapted over time to program ourselves or, provide exercises within Sparta's programming that fit what we want to accomplish. So I think that just in general, for the ease of our users, it's a lot of times just knowing your why. Okay, why are we doing these things? And being able to, relate that to the athlete. So something here, you already mentioned, we've got the cerebral kids where, sometimes it takes a little bit of selling as to what you're actually going to get out of the workout. It's not always comfortable to have a bar on your back or front squat, but the exercise that you're going to get the most out of are the exercises Sparta has validated are most effective in improving athletes' weaknesses. And, the strengths will stay strong because it's going to reflect what the athletes are doing most with their results in the force plates.
Yeah, I think you said it really well there. I mean, every day as a coach, you essentially have to sell your program, whether you're using data or not. When the athlete rolls in and you tell them what to do, you better have a why. But I think where technology helps here is now you can possibly have some objectivity behind that why and show them when it's improving and when it's not. I think that's the biggest difference is anyone can go out there and run a program and tell them they're getting better. But if you can show someone objectively with the use of data, that buy-in and that retention, is that going to be that much higher?
Yeah. I mean, the reliability and the ability to retest and then change things, I think the feedback that you get from it is invaluable. Whereas you might have been guessing before, okay, well, we're going to, prescribe these percentages and we're going to use this exercise, but now we can be more specific with the exercises that we're selecting to, get the most out of the time that we have with the kids in the weight room.
Right. And I know a lot of the ways, and I did this in the past, and I know at a lot of universities, they'll program based on sport. So it's almost generalized in a sense of everyone in this sport needs to do the same type of workouts. How did that change with you guys and testing on with the force plates and using some of this technology? How did your programming change at that point?
I think regardless of whether we're using Sparta programming or, it's just workouts that we're writing up for the team, I think we still stick to the basics, some sort of push, some sort of pull, some plyometrics, jumping or power cleans. And it really depends on the sport. So it varies according to whether the team's in season or out of season. Some sport coaches have things that they want to see in the program that we also are on the same page with. So, football, we're going to max in bench, squat, clean. And if we're not training those lifts, then it doesn't give the kids a fair chance to actually max in those exercises. So we'll, train those big lifts and then also include exercises, as sort of a supplement to what the athletes are doing with us that are individualized based on their force plate results. So always targeting whatever the weakness is to improve that variable.
Yeah, no, that was well said. So now, when it comes to, okay, again, this is like kind of baffling. 4 coaches for 1,000 student athletes, right? So that's just so much to handle. It's so many people to look after. Even in a private facility when it's like 6 or 7 to 1, like that's nothing compared to the ratio that you guys are working with there. So that time that you can spend with each individual is that much more important. So how, are you guys using an app, or did the athletes have this on their phone when they're training, and then you can spend that time coaching more than like handing out their cards? Or how is that working with you guys there? I know you said that some teams are in and some teams aren't, but how is it working with the teams that are using the technology?
Yeah, so it depends by sport. So an example would be, women's lacrosse are fully bought in. So for the last 3 years, they've been using the software from Sparta. So we programmed workouts to the kids' phones. It's individualized based on, force plate needs. And they lift twice a week. The kids come in, Monday, Wednesday. They'll test the force plate every 3 weeks. Workouts will be updated according to whether their scan changed. If it didn't, then they can continue on the same trajectory with whatever lifts they're assigned. And I think that it's done two things, right? It's given the athletes some way to track their own training, so it gives them that ability to buy in a little bit more. But also now that they have a better understanding of the results, they actually push themselves more in the weight room than they had, a few years ago when we maybe were just writing up the workouts, and they sort of still have the autonomy to push the weights, but they understand why they need to do that a little bit better.
Definitely. Now, let's talk about a practicality standpoint. So now we know, especially in your situation with that ratio of coach to athlete, testing days are going to be much harder of a thing to come by, right? So having a true testing day and shutting down training for a bunch of athletes is not really something you guys can do. How much have you allowed the athletes to assess themselves when it comes to the force plate? Because I know that some of our partners will actually have the athlete walk up, select their name, and do it actually while the coach is out on the floor training. Is that something that you guys are doing there at Penn?
Yeah, we actually don't have time for that with the number of teams and athletes we see. So generally we'll give every team an orientation. So whether it's, the beginning of the semester, usually if, it's in the fall semester, teams come in, we'll take the freshmen through it themselves. Okay, here's the warm up we're doing to test the force plate. We'll take one kid through it. We have 3 force plates. So we can get like a group of 20 to test in like the first 15 minutes of a workout. So, I might do that with men's squash or women's tennis, but larger teams, men's lacrosse, they were in this morning. I had 20 guys who started over the weekend, saw significant time test before the workout. The rest of the guys will be expected to come in and test it on their own time. And they know, they have to have 2 hours of an activity, follow the warm up, come in and test. It takes about 5 minutes. So as long as the coaches are on board, they keep the kids accountable, and we just expect them to come in and get it done on their own time.
Yeah. Now, there's obviously the assessment part of it, right? There's the actual test that they're doing on the force plate, and that's obviously something you need. But how much from an education standpoint are these athletes understanding what they're doing that day? So if I come in the gym that day and I assess on the force plate, how quickly are they going to get feedback from either? And I know this is different now that they understand it a lot better, but initially when they would come in to assess, is it something where you guys could explain to them on the spot what was going on or what you saw and what they might see in their programming? How transparent are you with, okay, here's what we're seeing from the data, and then here's probably what you're going to see in your programming?
Yeah, we're completely honest with the kids, and I think that you have to be honest with it, and not freak out about the numbers where you could be at a risk. But here's what we're seeing. It doesn't mean this is going to happen. It's just bringing that, I guess, that awareness to what we're working on from an improvement standpoint, not necessarily focusing on like the injury side of it. From a mental aspect, when I'm communicating with the athletes, I'm coming at it from the angle of, okay, here's what we're working to improve. Here's the potential risks, but not necessarily that it's a concern, because it's going to reflect what the kids are doing most. And I think that over time, when we first got it, it was more of educating the entire team. And then now as we get groups of freshmen that come in the fall, it's more of like educating the freshmen, and, the upperclassmen still understand and they continue to ask questions. So the more they understand it, the more they can communicate with themselves. And it depends on team. So some sport coaches have asked, I've given all staff presentations to coaches, administrators, on how we're using it and what the results tell us, and what our intentions are in the weight room with making training changes. And I think that getting the coaches to communicate that to their team, and then it's sort of like an ongoing learning process for the athletes. And the more they ask, the more they learn. Yeah,
I love that. And I love when there's transparency, and oftentimes even telling someone when they're getting worse, right? Because in my experience using it, it was often when we weren't making progress that the athlete would be way more open about maybe something that's going on outside of the training facility or off the field, right? It's not,
Definitely.
they don't just walk in, you're just like, hey, how was your night? How are you sleeping? It was like all of a sudden, like things weren't going well, and then they would tell you why, and then
Yeah.
you can improve on it. And I think that there's so much to be said about being transparent about the data, because if you're not, and athletes today will talk about this, if you look at universities and professional organizations today, there's a lot of technology. It's not just force plates, it's a little bit of everything. And they can start to feel like lab rats if they're not being told what the data is used for, what it's saying about them and all that. And they'll begin to, the buy-in's going to go away. They don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to do any more of this testing. I'm out. So understanding that what you do and how it impacts what you're going to do from a training standpoint is huge, because then you'll want to do it more because it's going to impact what you're doing.
Right.
So, I can tell you that my time using it in a professional setting, yeah, there was a lot of guys who were just like, okay, cool, what next? But there was a lot of guys they would ask questions right away, and we would tell them, hey, this is why you're going to see more of this in your programming, for this exact reason. And it really builds that buy-in from an athlete standpoint. And then they can compete with it, so to speak. They can try and improve it and really take it and make it theirs. Which is really where I thought it was fun to celebrate the small victories. When you saw improvements, when you saw things that they put the sweat into to improve, we were going to celebrate that a little bit. Are you guys doing that at Penn at all?
Yeah, I think the competition aspect is huge. Just from testing the vertical jump, it's funny seeing kids, like get on each other, like, oh, your vert's only 16 or whatever it comes up as when they jump. But then looking at individual scans, it's the athletes, sort of wondering, okay, why did my scan change? Is this good? Is this bad? And not that it's good or bad, but we want to make it better. We're always shooting to make it better. You mentioned the shoot, what was I going to say? It'll come back to me. In terms of just getting the kids to, I guess, have a better understanding of what their sport means, gets them to, I think, invest more in the training. So I've had athletes who, for 2 years they were doing the same exact workouts, and it's maybe because they're not pushing the weights or they had an injury, they got a little bit set back, but their scan never really changed. And I think in an effort to get out of whatever exercises they were assigned, that's when they sort of, like the light came to them. They were like, okay, well, I have to do more of what I'm already doing to get the results that I need.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a lot of that myself. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you too, you have some experience in the trenches coaching, you have a lot of experience lifting yourself and going through this stuff. How has this technology improved your coaching? Because I could speak to my own, I think that the daily grind as a strength coach, sometimes it'll get on you and it can come a little monotonous just with going through those, the certain daily routines. Now, one thing I will say is when I started looking at the technology and using it, I know that I personally changed my coaching style because I was trying to get a little bit different results. I was trying to get these different sequencing patterns. I was trying to not allow them to compensate where I knew they were. Can you say that changed the way that you look at movement and how you coach certain things, and you think it's changed your staff as well?
I think staff overall, again, that's super individual and depends on the coach, the sport that they're working with. For me personally, I'm all about efficiency. The time that we have, we're never getting back. So let's get the most out of it. And I think that what the force plate has allowed us to do is, be really selective with what we're doing. Takes out a lot of the guesswork. And I think when we first got it, one of the hesitations as a coach was it takes away the art of the programming, where you might not, be able to include certain exercises because it's not validated that this exercise is going to help, but that's actually not the case. We try different exercises based on what resources we have here. And I think that we're still seeing results regardless of the exercises that we're selecting, because we're really thoughtful with the way we approach the training, especially for workouts that are programmed to the app. You're in the weight room and you might only have, 40 minutes to get that workout in. And we know that what we're doing is going to be effective in improving any sort of weakness and preventing injuries. So. I would say
Yeah,
that from an efficiency standpoint, it makes you a better coach because you're on the floor more. You're not worried so much about what is being assigned. It's coaching the movements as the kids are working out.
definitely. Now, how have you used the technology to help show your value? I know, women make up less than a quarter of the strength and conditioning coaches in the field. So what challenges have you observed as a female in the industry, and how can you continue to show your value with the use of data?
I think the communication aspect is huge. It's how you're communicating the information, what people are understanding. And if you can actually, get the coaches to buy in and understand the value in what you're assessing. So here at Penn, we've got a unique setup where sports medicine, athletic training, and strength and conditioning are all really close. We're actually located pretty much in the same building, Franklin Field. And our team physician, who's chief of staff over at Penn Medicine, is part of our contract with you guys is conducting research. So he and the physical therapist, collect the data that we provide and have done their own research to validate, the injury reductions, the trends in sport characteristics. And we were able to validate that information using our population of Ivy League athletes, which I think there was definitely some skepticism from sports medicine as to whether we would fall under those T-scores. So I think that being able to show the return on your investment from the research standpoint that we have over here is huge. So again, the reduction of injuries, our team physician is publishing some research. So there's numbers that I can't actually really share, but from an overall cost savings in the 3 years of our use, and this is depending on how insurance claims are finalized. So we really have 2 years of reporting from when a kid graduates to be able to show actual hard numbers on this. But we've saved over $500,000 in reduced insurance premiums by saying, less physician visits, less major surgeries, and things of that nature.
I mean, that's such a great thing to be tied so closely with the sports medicine side and looking into more of the research to validate what you guys are doing. That's huge. I mean, that's working with the medical side and having that understanding, within the whole organization of how this is benefiting everyone, and so that everyone understands on a deeper level. That's a good relationship that you guys have there. Yeah. I know you guys have the abstract accepted into the College of Sports Medicine, which is great.
We did.
You can just, I know you did kind of just touch on that briefly, but what's kind of like the main summary from that?
So we tried to correlate it to win-loss records. So we have our 33 teams, we put them into users, non-user categories, and 12 of our teams are considered users. So that's at least testing compliance with the force plate frequency. So every 3 to 4 weeks, those 12 teams are testing on the force plate at least. Whether teams are using the Sparta software from a programming standpoint differs. But for those 12 sports, 9 out of 12 in the last year, so 75% finished in the top half of the Ivy League. So if you can correlate the wins to at least just jumping on the force plate and being able to change programming accordingly, I think that's huge.
No doubt. That's great. It's funny as I think it's hard to let this into what if you're not using tech at all and someone brings this in and you start to use tech, I think it's so hard to allow it in and change the things you do and change your mindset on things. So I think once you use it for a certain amount of time, you start to see how it can make things more efficient. You can use things, you can spend more time coaching, you look at things differently, you let the data help fuel kind of what you're doing. And I remember thinking there was times when I was using this in professional baseball, and I remember thinking to myself, what happens if we don't have this anymore? What would I go back to, or what things, have I learned from this that I would just have to continue using? And so I kind of wanted to ask you, what are some of your non-negotiables for when considering technology for who you're working with? Are there certain things that you're like, I got to have this, and then now that I've seen this, I need it to be practical? What are things that you're looking into when you're looking at tech that you just can't live without?
I've really only used Sparta here at Penn, but I've been plenty of other places just to visit and see what they're using. And I think that a lot of people are collecting information and they have lots of data and numbers, but not a lot of actionable items to take away from it. So I think anything where you can actually make changes in training based off the information, you need that like real-time feedback. So if you're not getting feedback that's actionable, I'd say that's a no-go for me, because we're spending time to collect the information and then what, you know? If you're not going to do something with it, it's probably not too valuable.
I would agree there. Now, I would also want to ask you, because of that and it being actionable, sometimes wanting to use it, and how often are you guys assessing on average with the athletes?
For teams that are users, like every 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, and that's what the way that we did it when I was using it in professional baseball. We did it every 3 to 4 weeks. We were looking at that physiological adaptation and that phase of training or whatever it was. I think looking back on it now, I wish I would have done it a little bit more frequently, especially with certain athletes that were maybe more at risk, because it really could, being that neuromuscular snapshot, it could drive more of a plan for that given day. So would you say that you have athletes that want to test more, or maybe do you have athletes that are maybe more at risk that you think are worth testing more? Do you have any of those situations?
Yeah, so we've had some athletes come back from injuries, and generally they'll test more frequently. An example, actually, you had mentioned before with sort of the other factors that play into the athlete's results. We did have a female athlete who came back from an ACL tear, and her training was good, her score was healthy. The next time we tested, it went down, and so we sort of took a step back because none of our training variables had changed. Practice hadn't really changed much, and we asked her, what's going on here? And at the time it was midterms. She was pledging a sorority. She was getting 3 hours of sleep. So all of that factored in, and all the other variables were the same. So that was the reason for her score to have been negatively affected. And I think that that's huge, where it's you look to those other factors and see how other things actually, change your training.
Yeah.
Change your results.
Yeah. And you talked about so many people just collecting data and not really using it. I mean, that's probably the most common theme. That's the most common thing that we see in tech and everything, is everyone wants to collect it. Everyone wants to see it. It's fancy, it's sexy, it makes you feel important, but like, unless you're actually using it and using it as much as you can to drive the program, there's no point in collecting it. And that's when I went back to talking about the athletes feeling like lab rats. When you have them testing a number of things and they're collecting it, but they don't actually know where that goes or what it's doing, that's going to be an issue. It's going to be an issue. So, what's in your approach and your philosophy of tech, where do you think the most in strength and conditioning get it wrong? Because I can say this, for example, I was hesitant to use tech, and it wasn't necessarily an ego thing. I think it was change. It was changing my mindset of doing something in a different way, which I feel is pretty common. But what would you think, where do you think that, a lot of people will get it wrong, in strength and conditioning?
I think if you're not using it the way that it's intended to be used, going back to what are you taking away from it? What actionable items do you have to be able to implement in your training? And I think you do have to have some decent amount of information. So the consistency with testing, and I think that the assessment has to be valid, where you can reproduce the results, or at least it's telling you the information that you have maybe a certain set of expectations, and it's proven over multiple tests or trials, which we're seeing with Sparta.
Yeah. I think, I think it was really cool. You mentioned this earlier, and what you guys have looked at, the teams that are actually using it are actually winning more. Did you say that?
Yeah.
And that's huge, right? Because if you're talking to a sport coach, they're like, well, you guys do your thing in the gym and we're going to do our thing out here on the field. But now you're actually seeing it all kind of come together. Like, look, what we're doing in here is impacting what's going on out there. And I know that, again, we go back to that word of trust. Do they trust you? Do they want you, working with their athletes all the time? Do they think that you're taking away from certain things? And those are definite things that there are issues with that trust between sport coach and strength coach. And it's obvious now that you guys have that trust. And I think in my experience, the first year or two of using it, it was just, okay, you guys, again, do your thing in the weight room. We'll do our stuff out here. But then they started to see the injuries the injury rate decreasing, athletes being more available throughout the season. And there's a definite, I think seeing that winning is everyone just wants to win. And now we're seeing it translate to that. I mean, how important is that for everyone there at Penn, including the sport coaches?
I think it's huge. Every coach wants to have a lot of control. So I think that if we can at least control for our variables in the weight room, and now that we're able to prove, okay, this is helping, here's why, and here's what we're going to continue doing to, get these results. I think that that's been beneficial for us to be able to communicate more effectively with those coaches who have bought in. The coaches who haven't bought in, it's always confusing to me. I'm like, we're on your team. We want to win also. So I think that, from just a general overview standpoint, I take a step back and I'm like, if I were a sport coach, which I have also been a Division II lacrosse coach, the people that are around you supporting you should also want your team to win. If they don't, they're not the right people for your team. But I think that the communication aspect for us and being able to show, okay, here's the results, here's what we're doing, here's how it helps. And, not every sport coach wants to know all this information. And it's sort of how invested are they? How much do they want to know, learn? They've all got a lot on their plate with other meetings, team meetings, just trying to plan their practices and that sort of thing. So if we can take control of what we need to do in the weight room, and the coaches don't have to worry about it, and we're seeing results, I think that it's a win-win.
Yeah, that's it. When the coach doesn't have to worry about what you guys are doing and what we're doing from a physical performance standpoint, I mean, that's a win. When they're starting to see athletes get hurt, when things are going haywire like that, then they start asking questions. And now I think that's when you're doing something right. They stop asking what's going on in your realm and you're winning more.